On the topic of labor negotiations, the questions sometimes come up as to whether the fire chief should be directly involved in negotiating the labor contract and what method of negotiations is best. Both of these questions should be answered well in advance of the beginning of labor negotiations. To the first question, the fire chief definitely must be involved in some way in labor negotiations. The degree and type of involvement depends on the political, fiscal, and labor climates of the fire department and city administration. Will they support interest-based bargaining, or will classical labor negotiations be used? In either case, the fire chief must realize that he or she represents both sides and must alternatively be able to advocate for each to the other. Interest-based bargaining is more desirable if the climate will permit it. It involves both parties openly stating their interests rather than their positions, and collaboratively seeking mutual agreeable solutions through compromise. For example, the city's interest might be limiting or reducing the size of the budget, while the union's interest might be increasing health care benefits. At first, they might seem mutually exclusive, but through dialogue, the parties may be able to identify efficiencies or cuts in other areas in order to satisfy both interests. Interest-based bargaining requires the advance agreement of both parties and involves some prior training if interest-based bargaining has not been used before. It also requires a high level of mutual trust. If interest-based bargaining is used, the fire chief can play a pivotal role in bringing leadership to the negotiation since he or she understands the interest of both parties and can keep the conversation on track and moving forward. Classical negotiations involves both sides trying to predict the strategy of the other and maneuvering into a position of maximum advantage. It is inherently adversarial, and for this reason, I recommend that the fire chief participate much less directly than in interest-based bargaining. The fire chief will be required to administer the contract once implemented if he or she is to be effective with the union and the city administration. He or she needs to be somewhat insulated from the process. The chief's role in classical negotiations should be more tangential, coming in periodically to check on progress and to act as a consultant when needed. In my experiences in contract negotiations, the fire chief participated entirely. The chief was part of the city negotiating team, which also included the deputy chief and various city officials. This approach worked best when both parties, the city and the union, acknowledged the other as having a stake in the success of the department. With this as their common goal, the negotiations process is much more agreeable and productive, whether interest-based bargaining or classical negotiations is employed. Whether the fire chief is involved directly or indirectly, negotiations should never be conducted primarily by attorneys.